Welcome to the Demeere podcast. We talk about martial arts, self-defense, and a whole lot more. And now, your host, Demeere.
Hi everybody, and welcome to episode 7 of the podcast. A quick intro on this episode, so what it's all about. I'm going to give you a couple of updates, one big update really, and then I'll talk about how I taught my children self-defense, which is one of the questions I received from one of my patrons, and there's going to be a quick Q&A. So that said, let's move on right away to the update. So first of all, my apologies for being late with the podcast. I had a scheduled interview that fell through, and then all of a sudden we tried scrambling and finding different ways to get it done in time, but in the end it didn't work out. So that's why we ended up having to postpone, and I was suddenly without a guest for an interview, which is poor planning on my part, but there wasn't really much I could do about it. So that's why you have now another episode with me as opposed to a guest, and I'm actually working on the next guest already. So with a little bit of luck, that interview will either be that guest or I'll have a new one. So that's the first update, and then we get to the next one, which is slightly less pleasant. So I've mentioned that I had a problem with my shoulder since July, and I just had confirmation. I went to the surgeon this week, and basically my scheduled surgery is for in about 4 weeks, where they're going to fix my shoulder, which is completely messed up. There's one of the rotator cuff muscles that is completely torn off, the supraspinatus, and there's a tear in the labrum, which is the capsule on the inside of the shoulder. So that means extensive surgery. Well, extensive might not be the right word, but it has some pretty interesting consequences. Some of these are that for the first 4 weeks I have to immobilize my arm completely, so that actually the tendon can attach itself correctly to the bone again. And then afterwards, obviously, there's going to be rehab at first, trying to create mobility again in the shoulder joint, because after 4 weeks of immobility, that's going to suck. So that's the first part, and then afterwards, of course, building up all the muscles again that will have atrophied. So I'm looking at a very minimum 6 to 8 weeks of staying at home and being a good boy and basically recovering from the surgery. So that means also, which is a main issue for me, as I'm self-employed, and if I can't drive, then I can't work, so I don't have an income at that point. So I'm basically looking at different opportunities and different possibilities of what I can do, and instead of focusing on the negative, I'm focusing on the positive, which is I can actually work from home on the computer. It'll take some work getting used to doing everything left-handed, but I'll be practicing and that'll work out. So in the meantime, what I have planned is actually trying to emphasize some of the things that I have been doing for a while now, but I haven't really made a lot of publicity about it, just because I've been so busy with pretty much doing everything else. One of the things I'm going to promote a little bit more is my coaching calls and the long distance training that I do with people already for a few years now. In essence, it's working via Skype and having coaching calls for both self-defense and several specific martial arts that people contacted me for, and they were living abroad and didn't have an opportunity to train with me in Belgium or fly me over. So I started doing that a few years ago, and I'll promote that a little bit more. So there's two ways. There's coaching calls that we do via Skype, but also the people send me a sample video from anywhere between 5-10 minutes or more, depending on what they want, of them training, performing certain techniques and so on. And then I actually use my video analysis software to slow everything down and point out the technical things that they can work on to improve. So that's what I'll be focusing on a little bit more when I'm stuck at home. But obviously that takes some time setting everything up. So I had a second thought, and actually, it was somebody else who suggested that to me, and I looked into it. It might be an interesting way to go about it. Basically, it would be crowdfunding my Boxing for Self-Defense book, which is coming along nicely, but obviously due to coming back from the US after 2 weeks, and then the MRI for my shoulder, and then slowly trying to figure out how I would make everything work if I needed surgery, which is now confirmed. It's been slowing down a little bit, but this week I've picked it up again. the whole idea would be that some sort of crowdfunding, whether it's Kickstarter or Indiegogo or something along those lines, where the offer is that you get different perks depending on where you sign up on. It could be the ebook, then also the paper book. In addition, at another perk level, you would get your name in the acknowledgement section, access to a private online video course. I'll do live streaming, Q&A sessions, and all the way up to what I just mentioned, coaching calls and video analysis of your training footage. So that's basically what I'm right now spending a lot of time in researching that and setting all that up on a technical level. So that's the huge update that I needed to share. If anybody has any ideas, suggestions, or requests of anything that you would like me to include in that, just leave me a comment or contact me on Facebook. All the links are in the show notes on how to reach me, and then and I'm obviously open to suggestions. Before I go on, it's nothing life-threatening. It's just a shoulder injury is very annoying to heal because it's the muscle that is affected, and the labrum is actually these are small parts of your body, so they don't heal all that well. And because the way that your shoulder is structured, it's a ball and socket joint, so it's a joint that is quite unstable to begin with. So it'll take some time to heal. I'm expecting a full recovery, which will actually take a fairly long amount of time before all the muscle mass comes back and coordination and all those kind of things. So that's something that I'm working on right now, and obviously trying to improve and as quickly as possible try to get all that stuff sorted out. So that's the big update. That's all that I'm working on right now. Obviously, I'm going against a deadline. In about 4 weeks, I have my surgery, and after that, I'm going to be focusing on healing at first, and then the other things I just mentioned. So a lot of work for the coming month with me. But I just wanted to let you guys know if there is a slowdown in certain things that I'm for instance, on my Patreon page and the blog and on my Facebook page and so on. If you don't immediately see me there right away, then don't worry, I'm still alive. I'm just somebody's playing butcher with my shoulder, so I'm gonna have to recover from that. So that was the first part that I wanted to mention. Then we have something else. So I'll move on to the main topic, and that there's a question that came from somebody who's supporting me on Patreon, Jacob Holi. And he had an interesting question that I wanted to answer. So his question is how to teach self-defense, primarily prevention, avoidance, awareness, de-escalation, and so on, to kids from a smaller age to teenager, or at least your experience with your kids. And this is a topic that I actually wanted to talk about for a while now, and I'm going to take a very specific slant to this question, because I actually have plans of getting a pediatrician who's also a martial artist as a guest on the podcast here, and ask him more physically questions related to the physical part of the training, which I think he would be an excellent expert to talk about. So I'm going to talk about some other things that I think are important in this regard. First things first, so my kids are now 15 and 17. I've got a boy and a girl, and I've done very specific things to teach them all these topics throughout their life from relatively early on. My key goal is that I wanted them to be self-reliant. I wanted them to be confident as they grew up, and more independent thinkers who don't just run with the crowd and follow whatever fancy takes them. But also, I wanted them to be physically active and basically grew up to be strong people. That was my goal. Now, the method that I used was two things, talking and showing. I'll cover them both briefly. The talking part is, in my opinion, one of the key points, in that I would very often just talk to my kids about all sorts of things and explain how things work, why they can do certain things, why not, and so on, so that we get into this habit of communicating. And the end goal that I had was that they need to know that they can always come to me no matter what. that dad would be there to talk to, even if it's uncomfortable, even if they might not really want to talk about it, but they know they can trust me, that I won't just start yelling at them, which is something I never do. So keeping open lines of communication, I think, when you want to teach your kids anything, that's the start. It begins there. And for the record, I can't even remember ever shouting at my kids. Obviously, I got angry with them from time to time. We're only human, obviously, after all. But I never shouted at them. And aside of maybe a smack on the butt when they were little, I never hit them. And the main reason is that, first of all, I didn't want to, because I don't think that's going to be very effective as a teaching method. But also, I didn't need to, because I was very consistent in the way that I approached my kids, which I'll explain why a little bit later on. And as I mentioned, I didn't want to just strike them, because there's another part of it is I didn't want my kids to be afraid of me. I think that's a bad way to teach self-reliance and to teach a kid to stand up for himself if, as a parent, you're extremely scary to them. So when they messed up and I got angry, I forced myself to keep my emotions in check and focus on the incident itself as basically a teaching moment. So I would show them, okay, this is what you did wrong, this is why it is wrong, and these are the consequences, which is one of the main things in everything that I did as a parent, is that explaining that actions have consequences and trying to get them to learn what that means. Now, the other reason that I would never scream at them or hit them is that I wanted them to show a way of solving conflicts that is something that they can follow as a model throughout their entire life. And that means, for me personally, primarily communication, so talking, and as a second item, looking for a compromise, looking for a win-win situation. Now, hitting somebody out of anger doesn't really rhyme with that, so that's not the way to go. So obviously then I couldn't set that precedent either. Now again, I didn't need to, because I was extremely consistent with my kids. No means no, yes means yes, and so on. For instance, one of the things that my kids heard a lot when they were relatively little is that it was no use whining, because if I said no, it remained no. And eventually, I think it happened a couple of times, and I said to my daughter when she was very young, and she wanted something, and I said no. And then she kept on nagging, and I said, look, every time you've tried to ask me several times for something you wanted, and I said no the first time, did it ever turn into a yes? She looked at me and she thought about it, and she said, no, it didn't. I said, do you understand now? Maybe you should stop asking. And then she got it, and that was it. And no hissy fit, no crying, no anger, just that, okay, when dad says no, it's no. And she accepted that. So, and that brings me to the next point, what I think is also very important when you teach children anything. It starts with teaching them to control their emotions. I believe that is an integral part of becoming an adult. It's that you learn to control your emotions, which is something obviously children haven't learned yet, so that's why they tend to be filled with drama sometimes when even little things happen, because they really can't control their emotions just yet. Then as an adult, you have to teach them. For instance, my kids were free to cry whenever they were in pain or they were sad, something like that, but not because they didn't get what they wanted. Not to use it as a tool to manipulate the people around them. Just crying to get attention, or crying to because they were angry at me, or they were annoyed that something didn't go their way, or somebody else wasn't playing the game they wanted to play, and so on. So that was a part of it, and I explained to them many times, it's perfectly fine to feel those emotions. It is not fine to use them against other people. So, and that's how it starts. You set the certain precedents that I think they need to follow. Now, there's another part of it. Like I said, talking was one of the methods that I use a lot, but the other one is showing. For example, I divorced when my kids were relatively young, many years ago, and I got some of the best advice from Lauren Christensen, who was my mentor. We talked a lot during that time, and he was really there for me. So I have a huge debt that I can never repay to him for being there for me when I was actually in a pretty bad situation. And he said to me, "Don't be a Dairy Queen, Dad." And I didn't know what Dairy Queen was, so he explained that to me. And it's kind of like, let's call it a McDonald's, and that will be easier for the international audience to understand. Um, that meant that what a lot of guys do when they get divorced is that they end up being the good parent, and the other parent, the mother in my case would have been, ends up having to be the having to be the bad parent. That would be always the dad taking his kids to the movies, to do the fun stuff, to go to McDonald's, to go to Dairy Queen, and always being the one who does the awesome stuff that the kids wanted to do, but never doing the disciplining, never being the guy who says no. You don't do kids a service with that. Quite on the contrary. I think it sets an extremely poor example. We did that kind of stuff, but it wasn't like the norm. So, for instance, they would see me do the dishes. I would take my kids with me to go get groceries, which isn't fun if you know what that is like. We have really small kids, but it was a teaching moment when they came along. It would have been a lot easier to just do the fun stuff with them, but then I wouldn't be showing them the right example. And the right example is that, look, just because your mom and me are separated, that doesn't mean that all of a sudden you're going to lead a different life. I still have to work. All the chores around the house still have to be done. So that doesn't change. So it needs to be consistent. And they have to see that. And another aspect of that is they always saw me working. And that was something that I did on purpose, so that they, again, didn't get the impression, well, Dad, he always has plenty of time, and we can always ask him whatever we want to do, and he'll just jump at whenever we snap our fingers. They'd see me get home after a long day of working and then get on my computer, and I'd work some more because there was still work left to be done that day. For instance, when they were younger, what also happened is I would work at night. They'd go to bed at around 8 or at the latest 9 when they were a bit younger, and they'd wake up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, and they'd see me sitting behind my computer still working in the middle of the night. And the point was that, well, first of all, the work needed to be done, so I didn't want to spend all my time when they were awake working on a computer. So I would do it when they weren't actually there, when they were in bed, and then I would just work a couple more hours, and then that would free me up during the day for more time for them. But the point is that they saw me doing that kind of stuff, and what I wanted them to learn is that you need to work hard in life. Nothing comes for free. You aren't entitled to anything. The sun comes up for free. Everything else you work for. And if you can teach your children that kind of mindset, that tends to help them stay clear of situations where they get into trouble, where they will actually end up coming into contact with people who are in a lifestyle where violence is more common. So that is one of the reasons why I did that. Now, speaking of methods, another thing that I did a lot was using books and movies, because children like stories. They remember the stories, so I would use them to teach certain things as they come up. For instance, one of the book series that I used was the Tiffany Aching books by Terry Pratchett. I will put a link in the show notes so you can look up those books. It's a fantasy world, and it's a young adult book series. So what I did is I would read to them before as a bedtime story, and dumb it down a little bit, translate it from English to Dutch, and then do the funny voices and all that kind of stuff. But one of the main reasons is that it's a very interesting book series. It's well written, obviously, because it's by the late and great Terry Pratchett. But what would happen is that there were certain scenes and situations in the books where I could point to my daughter, who had quite a temper at times, that one of the teenage girls was doing something, and the reaction was obviously very negative by the other characters, and I could explain to her, like, look, see, this is what happens when you act like that. Now do you see how do they think about her? And she said, yeah, okay, I get it. So, and it's just a way of driving home certain lessons and to help them understand how life works, and just driving home the point that it's not just about them. There's more to life than just you, and helping them figure out how relationships work, how you interact with other people, and so on. So that was a big part of it as well. And obviously movies. And now that they're older, the teenagers, so we watch more adult movies and TV series. And then we talk about what happened, what the motivations of the characters were, what went wrong, why, and so on. And this is just us talking about something we both enjoy. But more often than not, there's always a lesson to be learned. And you don't have to obviously, beat it into their heads with a hammer. That's never the point. It's just as you're talking about something, you point something out to your children like, look, this is how this works. And did you see how this character acted and reacted? See how it pissed off that person? Well, and then the fighting started. See how that worked? And you could just point stuff out and show them. And they get it. They understand. And after a while, they see it even better. So that is one of the things that I did. Just this is all about building character, being self-reliant, making sure that they have self-confidence, making sure that they have discipline and so on, which I believe is all about integral qualities to live a safe life. Now, bringing this to another point, how do I see my role as a parent? Very specifically, I am not their best friend. I am their father. So it's my responsibility to prepare them as best as I can for the rest of their lives, and I will do that duty. That is how I see my role. Now, they already have friends. I don't need to be their friend. I need to be the guy who is there for them no matter what and tells them what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. And if you can get that going, then I think you can be a responsible parent. Now, one of the things that I explained to them at a very early age, because it's a very easy image to use and the analogy works in my opinion. And I said, look, imagine that what your life is now is that you're in this fenced-in area, which is relatively small. There's a bunch of toys, and you can play. You can just do pretty much whatever you like. Now, you see some stuff outside of the fence as well, and it looks interesting. But you can't get there just yet because the fence keeps you in. Here's the thing. If I see that you can act responsibly and that you can do so, you can act safely, then I will move the fence back a little bit. And so you get more room to play and new stuff to play with. And same thing applies if you act in a responsible manner, in a way that I can see that, okay, you're trustworthy and you won't get in trouble. Excellent. The fence goes back even more. And that keeps going until you no longer see there's a fence. And when that's the case, that's just when we end up being in the rules and the laws that a society has. Because that's eventually what the fence becomes, is society's rules, laws, and habits and moray and so on. And they got that analogy very quickly. But the other side of that was, which I also explained to them, where I said, look, if you do not follow the rules, if you are irresponsible, if you do stuff that is dangerous to yourself and others, then the fence comes closing in on you until you prove again that I can trust you to not be stupid and do dangerous stuff, and then the fence moves away again. It's your choice. So I give them agency and certain parameters and certain rules, and they learn to work with that. Now, don't get to the idea that I was extremely strict with them, quite on the contrary, but they were very clear rules, and my kids accepted those, and knock on wood, to this day, they never acted out. They never really got into trouble. And they seem to be well adjusted. They have good grades. They have a bunch of friends, and they seem to be enjoying life. We do stuff together all the time. We talk, we laugh, we make jokes. Mine are usually considered silly, but I can live with that. So that means that now they end up being relatively self-confident and enjoying their life, which was the whole point. So what I wanted to do is teach them life skills and a philosophy that helps them to live a great life, no matter where it takes them. Now, why? Well, if they grow up to be responsible, strong adults who work to get what they want, and they enjoy the process, and they basically act the way that you would pretty much want any kid to act. Well, if I can teach them that, and that is their mindset as they get a little bit older, when they become adults, the chances of them making the stupid mistakes that get you in trouble, those odds go way down. So if they're confident, for instance, to not have to feel like they have to fight when somebody acts like an idiot towards them, then they can let it slide and they don't have to get into a fight that can be avoided. They should have learned that there are other ways of handling those kind of conflicts from the example that I gave them. And also learned that it doesn't need to affect their ego too much. Now, there are obviously no guarantees, of course, in anything, but I think that this way of parenting is more important than any of the physical aspects of self-defense that I can teach. And that's why I give this long explanation, just to point this out, is that it all starts way before you teach your kid how to throw a punch or how to throw a kick. I think all that stuff is much more important. Now, talking about kind of training, my basic philosophy was that I shouldn't expect the same kind of passion and interest for martial arts and self-defense for my kids as I had. And that's okay. That's perfectly fine. I've seen how that kind of thing can backfire when a very dedicated martial artist forces his children to practice. And there was this guy I knew here in Belgium who did that. He was a very, very disciplined martial artist, and he would train all the time. And he forced his son, actually, when he was very young, to train really hard. And the kid did it as long as he had to, and as soon as he could, he abandoned it. And the relationship between him and his dad was horrible. So I never wanted to be like that. What I would do is my kids would always see me training. So it was normal for them. They'd see me train on the heavy bag and all that kind of stuff. But I also use opportunities when they presented themselves, and they always do, to teach them certain stuff, whether it's physical or whether it's de-escalation or avoidance and so on. Now, like I said, we talked a lot, and I explained always why I did things a certain way, or why they couldn't do something, or why it is dangerous. I abhor, when I was a kid, I hated it, but I abhorred the kind of parents who say, do as I say because I tell you to. Why? Because I tell you to. That's not an explanation. That's just you asserting your authority because a kid doesn't have another choice. So that teaches them to submit to you, which I don't think is a healthy way to teach children. If you have authority, they have to respect it. You have to teach them that. You have to earn that respect. And that means explaining things to them, and in a way that they can understand. And many times I would tell them when it was too difficult, like, look, you're a little bit too young to understand this now, but we'll get back to this later if you want. You can write it down if you like, and get back to me whenever you want, and I'll try to explain it to you then. And they were always fine with that. Now, to give you a couple of examples, some of the things we did was obviously classics, like look both ways before you cross the street, that kind of stuff, basic. But also we would play an awareness game. For instance, when they were in the car and I had to get out for a minute to like mail a letter or whatever, something like that, I would tell them, look, I'll be back in a minute. You guys look around, and when I get back, I'll ask you questions. So that would happen. I'd get back in the car and I'd ask him, okay, close your eyes, and what's the color of the car next to us? How many people did you see pass by? And just basic questions, and they remember that to this day. Actually, I just talked to my son about that, and he remembered something, a very specific one we did at the post office. The whole point is getting them to open up to the concept of awareness, as opposed to immediately like drilling that they have to get everything right. That wasn't the point. The point was open your eyes, look around you. So that's one example. Another example, some of the things that I did, or more on a physical level, is enroll them in gymnastics from a very early age, and they both did several years as young children in gymnastics. My daughter did a little bit longer, but they both did a couple of years, because it's a really good way to get your coordination, to get some basic strength, flexibility, balance, and so on. And all of these are excellent physical traits that you can use for self-defense in any context. But also in most countries, gymnastics classes are actually quite well organized by age group and so on. And usually the teachers are actually quite good. So because it's a very old sport, so they tend to have good organization and teaching methods. One of the other things I also did is that I emphasized that they needed to work out and do sports. It doesn't matter to me what it is, but they need to be in shape, which again is a basic requirement for self-defense. And Nowadays, my boy, he wanted to learn to box, so I taught him some boxing. Now he's more into mixed martial arts, which I'll show him that. And my girl, I showed her a little bit of pencak silat, but she's not into it as much anymore right now. So, but I'm trying to get her maybe a little bit more interested before she goes off to college. We'll see how that goes. But one of the main things that I always did is that explain them the realities of violence. Explain them like I've shown my kids the old Rocky movies, because we've done a whole thing about 80s and 90s movies, starting with the family movies, obviously, like back what's it called? I'm blanking now on the title now. The Michael J. Fox movies when he's in the DeLorean doing the time travel, that kind of stuff. So they enjoyed that a lot, and obviously now the action movies, we did that because they didn't understand who Sylvester Stallone was or Arnold Schwarzenegger. I said that can't happen. My kids need to know this, so we did this whole movie experience for them. And my boy is actually watching Rocky 5 right now, and I explained to them, look, a real boxing match doesn't work like that. And if you get punched in the face like that a couple of times, you're going to go down. So this is nonsense that Rocky's staying upright for 12, 13 rounds like that. And that's obviously a funny way of explaining it, but there would also be many other opportunities in movies and TV series where I could point out, like, look, this isn't real violence. This is just to make it exciting to watch, which is one of the things that I've written about a lot, is that for too many people, violence is only what they see on TV or on the screen, so they have a very distorted view of reality. So, and aside of actually living through violent encounters, you have to get your information somewhere, so might as well avoid them having too many misconceptions. That's actually one of the things I did a lot, and giving you another example of one of the things I did. For instance, I think my boy was about 9 or 10 years old when he got in a fight at school. I came over to pick him up, and he was crying, so I picked him up. I comforted him a little bit. I said, what's wrong? And he explained that a couple of guys had ambushed him. There was one guy who pushed him, and that guy's buddy had been kneeling, bent over on the ground behind him, so he dropped, and then they kicked him a little bit. So there was a little bit of a scuffle, and that was it. So first of all, obviously, I got him to relax a little bit, and then we started, okay, what can we do? So we looked for solutions, and one of the things that I taught both my kids is, you don't start fights, but you end them. And they have a standing permission from me to defend themselves, no matter what. My kids are no punching bags. So, and I told them I will go to the principal, I would go to whatever teacher, and I would tell them the same thing. Is that if somebody attacks them and the teachers aren't there to help and they don't intervene, I don't care. They have my permission to fight back as hard as they can and actually end the fight. And if that means that the bully gets hurt, then that's his problem. My kids are nobody's punching back. And to this date, it's never been an issue, even though they had some fights, obviously, in school. But that it starts by giving them permission to defend themselves, which I think is a lot more effective than telling them that violence never solves anything, which is wrong to begin with. But I digress. Second point that I talked about with my boy is that, look, bullies don't want to hurt. They don't want to be in pain. They want to beat somebody up. They want to win. So give them some pain in return. Even if you end up taking a few shots, give them some back, and that's something that'll stick in his mind after a while. And maybe next time they'll say, well, I'm not going to take this guy because he fights back. So they'll look for a weaker victim, which is something you see, in the animal kingdom as well, and so on. So I would tell them that, like, don't be afraid to fight back. Even if you don't win, he'll remember you, and he'll look for a weaker victim. And the final point that I talked to him about then is that, look, it's not over. So pay attention for the next few weeks. And when it's playtime and you're all standing there, where are they? Make a mental note. Don't have to go paranoid, but look a little bit out for them and see where they are. See if they can ambush you again. When you go to the bathroom, watch out when you're anywhere else that you're alone and so on. Just be careful and be aware of what's going on. You know that this happened, and maybe it's over, maybe it isn't. We'll see. And obviously it was over, nothing happened. But getting into this mindset of understanding that violence doesn't end after the last punch, just as it didn't begin with the first punch. There's stuff that leads up to it, there's stuff that comes after, and explaining those kind of things to them. So that is a long explanation of how I taught my kids self-defense. Again, I focused more on everything but the physical training, because I'll talk hopefully with an upcoming guest about that, but then we can get more into the kind of physical stuff that is good and appropriate for children. So I hope that's a good answer, Jacob, and I'll look forward to your comments on that. And then we get to the Q&A part. So and this is a quick one because we're going over time. I got a question from Wayne Davidson, and he asked, what kind of heavy bag do you use to train? I use a big one. It's about my height. I'm about 5'9". That's 180 centimeters, 1.80 for the Europeans among you. And my bag is about 140 pounds, which is, I think, about 65 kilograms. So it's a relatively big one. For me, that works best because I can do everything that I need with that bag. I can hang it from the ceiling and do all the striking. I can put it up against the wall. I can throw it. I can do ground and pound. I can do everything I want with it. So that's what I like to use. I've had a couple smaller ones throughout the years, but my size is kind of what I like best. And that brings us pretty much to the end of this episode. So as always, I want to thank you guys for listening and supporting the show. Appreciate it a lot. If you want to support the show some more, obviously, I have my Patreon page where you can check everything out. There's a bunch of rewards that I give there, or you can just sign up for $1, and obviously you can stop at any time if you like. But you can support the show that way, or another way to support the podcast is by liking, sharing, subscribing, and just spreading the word to other people who might be interested. As always, you can also join me on social media, and I will have all the links in the show notes, both on iTunes and on my blog, where I will post this episode as well. That's pretty much it, and I hope I can get the next interview going as quickly as possible, and then I will try to get the new episode out sooner rather than later. So thanks again, everybody, and I will talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Demeere podcast. For more information, go to www.wimsblog.com.